Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started right away. My name is Vanessa Conroy, and I am the project officer of the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice project, which is a joint project between the National Women's Council and Community Work Ireland, both national representative organisations. The National Women's Council represents women and feminist groups throughout the country, including community work. Sorry, we've got a sound. Yeah, okay, we're good. Throughout the country, including Community Work Ireland as a member of the Women's Council, whilst Community Work Ireland represents community workers, groups, and development organisations. The Feminist Communities for Climate Justice project is funded under Strand 2 of the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications' Community Climate Action Programme. I'd like to welcome you all today to our webinar, Safe, Warm, Green, Towards Energy Justice, where we'll discuss the uneven impacts of energy poverty, why existing policies to tackle energy poverty are flawed, and why we should strive towards achieving energy justice. We'll also hear about lived experiences of energy poverty, as well as solutions to it from our fantastic contributors. Just to say at this point that you can keep up to date about the project via the project mailing list, where you can follow through to sign up, and that should be appearing in the chat soon enough. The event is also being recorded, and we also have Irish Sign Language interpretation here from Ciara. And please pop your questions into the Q&A box throughout the webinar as you come up with them, or we'll give you a period when we're finished speaking as well, and we will be getting to them at a dedicated Q&A session at the end. So just our agenda for the afternoon for the next hour. Ourselves, the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice project team, will introduce the project, and we'll also talk about the findings of the energy and housing chapter of our Feminist Climate Justice report. We'll then hand over to our guest contributors in this order, and we'll have Theresa first, who will be speaking on lived experience with energy poverty. And then we're going to hear from Sara and Elena from Friends of the Earth and Cairde, who will discuss their recent research on Roma communities and experiences of energy poverty. And finally, Avril from the Aran Islands Energy Co-Operative will speak on some of the initiatives being taken towards energy efficiency on the Aran Islands. And as I said, remember to put your questions and answers into the Q&A box, because we will have a dedicated session for questions and answers at the end. So the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice project is highlighting and responding to disproportionate impacts of the climate crisis and of climate policy on women and marginalised communities in Ireland. The project itself has various elements. It is amplifying, reflecting and responding to the voices of women and marginalised communities most impacted by the climate crisis. It is advocating with women and marginalised communities as active partners of the just transition, influencing and engaging with local and national policy on climate justice, reflecting feminist and gendered community work values, mobilising the collective efforts of grassroots organisations across Ireland through the establishment of our Feminist Communities for Climate Justice National Network, which you're all welcome to join. There should be a link to the network going into the chat in just a second. And we've also trained community workers and communities to respond to climate impacts with the development and delivery of our QQI Level 7 course, Community Work in a Changing Ireland, Feminist Climate Justice, which was done in partnership with Maynooth University's Department of Applied Social Studies. And we are also in the midst of developing toolkits that will be available to everybody. Feminist Climate Justice sits at the very core of our project, and it pays attention to the gendered and intersectional characteristics of climate justice, noting the impact on gender, disability, race, ethnicity, and so on when discussing all aspects of climate change and climate justice. And in our Feminist Climate Justice Research Report, which we'll be speaking a little bit more on in a moment, you'll see these pink speech bubbles throughout a few of our slides titled Voices of Feminist Communities for Climate Justice. And these are responses we received from participants in workshops we carried out throughout the first year of the project, all about climate justice and the climate crisis's current impacts on our day-to-day lives. And a link to the chat should be, a link to the report, should be going to you in the chat in just a moment if you'd like to have a look at it. So why this project in particular? This project is a direct response to the desires of community workers who want to communicate the climate crisis effectively with and to the communities that they live and work in. They have a need for more information, guidance, and tools. The project is also a response to data and policy gaps. Our existing climate policy does not adequately pay attention to the domestic gendered impacts of the climate crisis. We wanted more of a feminist analysis of climate justice as well. And the project is also a response to membership of the National Women's Council, who wanted climate justice integrated into the council's work. And as we said before, the Community Work Ireland is a member of the National Women's Council and put forward a motion on this at an AGM where it was voted for by the membership of our organisation. So why women in particular? Why do we pay attention to gender? The climate crisis and its impacts worsen existing forms of inequality, and there are many dimensions to gender inequality in Ireland today. The most well-known are likely the gender pay gap and the gender pension gap, with women having lower incomes and less wealth compared to men. Our gender pay gap is at 9.6%, and our gender pension gap is at 35%. Women also do twice as much unpaid care work compared to men, which impacts their ability to stay in continuous employment. But as well as that, caring roles are linked directly to energy use, to transport use, to food use, to choices, and to security as well, which all interact with the climate crisis. For example, most Irish women consider car ownership an absolute necessity to carry out caring duties and to alleviate safety concerns associated with public transport. And care work is key to how women experience and are impacted by the climate crisis. Women are more likely to be hardest hit by the impacts of climate emergency in Ireland and globally, as they are excluded from the economy and work in unpaid caring or domestic roles, which impact energy use and vulnerability to energy poverty and injustice. Women face huge barriers in access to employment, key resources and public services, including housing and health. Women are also disproportionately represented in deaths related to air pollution. Care and support work, which are vital work, as we saw very reflected during COVID-19, and it's also inherently low emissions work, must be part of our just transition. The intersectional nature of socioeconomic inequalities means that many marginalised women are affected in more particular and different ways. For example, non-EU migrant women are more likely to live in overcrowded housing. Older women are more likely to live alone and in low quality housing. 45% of lone parents, the majority of whom are women, live in enforced deprivation and in private rented accommodation and are the most affected by energy poverty. Disabled, traveller and Roma women face barriers in accessing employment, with only 17% of traveller women and 34% of disabled women in paid employment. And access to affordable, high-quality childcare is an issue for women and families right across the island, and this impacts their participation in economic, social and political life in society. This is why women's voices must be central, because they are some of the most impacted by the climate crisis and they need to be at centre of decision-making spaces as a result. So why a feminist community work approach to all of this? Well, this approach addresses and tackles the root causes of inequality and climate injustice. So we are looking for system change, not climate change. This approach cares. It champions caring work, paid and unpaid, and calls for it to be appropriately valued and recognised as green work. It transforms consultation into meaningful and non-tokenistic participation in decision-making. It focuses on the issue of women's representation in decision-making, as well as other marginalised groups. Those most impacted by the climate crisis need to be at the centre of decision-making spaces, as we've said. It champions a collective focus, meaning that we must fight for the many and not for the few. And it also means better public services, which benefit both people and the planet. And so now I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Collette, who will be discussing the findings of our baseline research.
Hello, everyone. So just bear with me. Perfect. So I am Collette and I work alongside Vanessa on the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice project. Back in April, we launched our Feminist Climate Justice Report. which was published in collaboration with University College Cork, Fiona Duclos, Catherine Ford and Edith Bustede. And today we'll be discussing some of the findings within the energy, poverty and housing section of that report. And we also had posted a link to that report in the chat, and there's a summary version as well. So what is energy poverty? First of all, it's a good question because not many people can agree on an exact definition. Here are just some examples of differing definitions. Energy poverty is defined as an inability to heat or power a home adequately, and that's according to the Energy Poverty Action Plan 2022. That energy poverty is a household spending more than 10% of its income on energy, including electricity, but excluding motor fuel, and that's according to the ESRI. And then that energy poverty occurs when a household must reduce its energy consumption to a degree that negatively impacts the inhabitants' health and well-being, and that's according to the EU. And then finally, according to the World Economic Forum, the lack of access to sustainable modern energy services and products is how they define energy poverty. So as you can see, the definitions do vary. Despite the lack of an agreed definition, most groups tend to agree on three factors within which they are experiencing or not experiencing energy poverty. So they are a household's income level, the cost of energy, and the energy efficiency of the home, so how well it retains heat. As these factors are constantly changing, levels of people in energy poverty are also very changeable. Levels of household income and the cost of energy are particularly changeable. As a certain level of energy use is just essential for day-to-day activities and to maintain a household and a healthy lifestyle, increases in prices hit lower income households harder. So weaknesses of the current measurement of energy poverty. Our current measurement in Ireland is too narrow, which is even noted within the current Energy Poverty Action Plan. Some of the weaknesses of our current measurement, as noted in the Feminist Climate Justice Report, are that the household is the current unit of measurement, meaning anyone outside of a traditional household is not properly accounted for. So this means people living in emergency accommodation and or indirect provision, people living in caravans, trailers or mobile homes, travellers who are not connected to a standard meter are not accounted for. Another element is income. Income as a measurement does not properly account for those who reduce energy use to dangerous levels, unhealthy levels, in order to save on costs and to avoid going into debt. And then a severe lack of detailed data, including gender detailed data, means the intersectionality of energy poverty is not fully understood. And this hinders us improving current measurements. So we need to develop a comprehensive measurement of energy poverty that includes all of these factors. Gender and energy poverty. So our report discussed the gendered impacts and vulnerabilities of energy poverty, which include all of these. So care work, as we've already mentioned, is still largely carried out by women, and care changes and genders patterns of energy use. Focusing solely on the household income and paid employment in our measurements overlooks the impact of unpaid care work on energy consumption. Women in particular, if they are working in paid employment and also caring, they experience a time squeeze, which leads to more intensive resource use if financially is feasible. And this can be because they need to do so to fulfill their household duties and care work. And this includes then a greater use of energy intensive household appliances. As already mentioned, women are more vulnerable to energy poverty due to pre-existing socioeconomic disadvantages. And other groups more vulnerable include travellers, disabled people, people seeking international protection, people living in direct provision, in emergency accommodation, and lone parents, of which the majority are women. When linking the findings of the Silk and Housing Agency reports, it becomes clear that those most impacted by energy poverty are female lone parents renting in the private rental sector in Ireland. They are also disproportionately affected by substandard housing quality, including problems with damp, mould, leaks, rot, and so on. So barriers to retrofitting. Retrofitting of homes, which is improvement, work done on existing homes to increase its energy efficiency and lower greenhouse gas emissions, has been championed by the Irish government as a key policy measure to reduce energy poverty. However, some of the groups who are most vulnerable to energy poverty in Ireland face barriers in accessing retrofitting. Those who rent are more likely to not be able to retrofit their home compared to those that own the property. So tenants in the private rental sector do not have energy to retrofit, to heat their home, to just improve the overall condition of the household that they're in, to make their lives warmer and also healthier. The traveller community are disproportionately impacted by energy poverty. They spend 5 to 6 times the national average on energy, and a report published by the National Traveller Money Advice and Budgeting Service, MABS, in 2019 found that from a survey conducted among travellers living in mobile homes or trailers, 72.3% went without heating and 60% could not keep their household warm. Despite this, current retrofitting schemes remain entirely inaccessible for travellers who live in trailers, caravans or mobile homes. So towards energy justice, we need to pursue and achieve energy justice for all, particularly for women and communities who are particularly vulnerable to energy poverty. There are 3 key principles to energy justice. So we've got distributional justice, which is the fair distribution of the benefits and burdens of energy systems. We've got procedural, so that's meaningfully engaging and including women and marginalised communities and those most impacted by energy poverty in decision-making processes relating to energy. And then recognition-based justice. So that's acknowledging the past and present experiences of those disadvantaged or harmed by the current energy system and working to repair those harms and eliminate disadvantage for all. It's important to stress that transitioning to a low carbon energy system alone is not enough to ensure energy justice. Research shows that citizen-led and community-led engagement when making decisions around transitions to renewable energy sources is incredibly important. Energy decision-making and energy access have substantial impacts on the everyday lives and social practices of communities. And this is why communities must be involved in the transition. So on that point, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa. And just a reminder to throw in any questions you might have into the Q&A box from now on, and we'll address them at the very end. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Collette, for all of that. I'm now delighted to introduce our first contributor, Theresa O'Donohoe. Theresa is joining us today to speak from lived experience of energy poverty. She is a single mother of 5 living in rural Ireland.
Now, unmute myself. Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks, Collette. That's a really interesting report and resonates quite a lot with me. Yes, I have 5 children, but actually they're not all children anymore, and they're growing adults at this stage, which is leading me into a situation where I realize more and more how vulnerable women are. And I used to feel bad about the situation, but now I realize it's not actually my fault. The whole system is stacked against women. And this report actually correlates and kind of supports that, which is really good. So I live in Clare, in quite a bit away from public transport. Well, there's public transport, but quite a bit away from cities and things like that. So the ability to work, it's very difficult to do all of that when you have young children. The other caring that I would do is climate activism, which a lot of women do. They carry out the voluntary roles necessary. So we play a very valuable role in society. So I never feel bad about that anymore. I don't feel guilty. Um, as a single parent, I'm one of the lucky ones because I actually own my own home. And that's, so much better than the situation of a lot of people that I'm aware of. But like a lot of other lone parents I know in Clare anyway, and I know of around the country, we end up buying cheaper houses because we come away from whatever reason where, I'm divorced, so I came away from that with not enough money to buy a decent house. So I bought a old stone cottage, and that is just a money pit. So, and then it also didn't qualify for a lot of the retrofitting. It's very hard to retrofit old stone houses. So, but that's all changing, I think. But it's still, I ended up moving out of it this year because my son moved into the old part of the house, which meant that I had to start trying to heat that old part of the house, but I couldn't, and it was damp and moldy, and he was living in it. So I just had to get up and move. My perception on all of this was always that it was my own fault, which I think we need to challenge ourselves in that. I have been on social welfare as a family and that sort of thing since 2009, and then I became a lone parent in 2014. But that was just with 3 kids, 3 teenagers, and moving to rural Ireland. And it causes an awful lot of stress. I didn't think of myself as in poverty, but I realize now because I now have a job. So, but actually, I've also found out that the job and the money I get, I still qualify for social welfare payment as a work and family payment because I don't actually get enough that the government assume is enough for a family that I live with. But it causes a lot of stress, you as soon as the car breaks down or something happens and you need a car in rural Ireland, and that's and I never drove when I lived in Dublin. I didn't learn to drive until I left Dublin. So it's very important that we have ways of getting around. So if the public transport doesn't actually facilitate what you need to do, we do actually need to get cars. And that in itself, when I was putting together my expenses, my car was actually my biggest expense in the household, along with the heat in the house and the energy related to it. I'm very paranoid. Poor children, they have. You were talking about the appliances in the house. I mean, I rarely use the dryer. It's just one of those things that I can't touch. And that in turn then made my house very humid because I would be drying clothes in the house. And I remember someone saying that to me once, that it was really damp in the house, but what was I supposed to do? I couldn't afford to put on the dryer. And, it's not just about turning off the immersion. It was also the dryer and everything else that was just, I felt was a waste. So now that I have a job, it's great. I can put on the heat. I realize how stressful it actually was as living on social welfare as a single parent, that, now I can say to my kids, if there's a school trip, I don't have to worry about it, that I can pay for it. Those things that I would have taken for granted years ago became something we just lived with, and I never questioned it. I mean, I might have felt a little bit bad, but I just assumed, well, this is my fault to have us in the situation. But we were actually in a poverty trap because it's kind of impossible to get out of that, because the insecurity of moving into a low paid job, especially in rural Ireland where there aren't an awful lot of jobs, and childcare and that sort of thing. So I no longer blame myself for it. And I think as women, we need to see that this is a systemic problem and we do need system change. And that's kind of why I'm happy to talk about it now. It's no longer something that I hide from or pretend is not happening. I think we need to stand up and speak up for women. And that's my story.
Thank you so much, Theresa, for sharing that with us and for sharing your lived experience with us. I'd like to now introduce our second set of contributors, who are Sara Hurley of Friends of the Earth and Elena Manciu of Cairde and Friends of the Earth. Sara Hurley is the Global Citizenship Education and Outreach Officer for Friends of the Earth Ireland. She works across adult, community and youth education, supporting groups and individuals to take informed action. Her work includes developing people's confidence and skills to participate in climate conversations, to empower people to understand climate justice and to see how their communities are connected with those affected by climate change and climate justice issues locally, nationally, and internationally. And Elena Manciu is a Roma woman based in Dublin. As the Climate Justice Peer Education Officer, her work links Cairde and Friends of the Earth to deliver workshops and information on climate change, climate justice, and what that means to her community. She likes to draw and can often be found exploring the botanical gardens as it connects her with nature. So thank you so much to Elena and Sara for joining us, and I'll let you go first.
Great, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Sara, and I have the pleasure of talking to you today about the Roma Climate Justice Peer Education Programme and a piece of research that we've conducted. There's a QR code here, which is just a link to the research paper if you have an interest in looking into that. We're going to talk about some top line findings today. So the Roma Climate Justice Peer Education worker, Elena, she's a part of Cairde and the Roma Education Group. With the Roma Education Group, we have produced 2 Romani and English language posters. So these ones are really cool because they describe different words around nature, which was the first one on the left-hand side. And then the second one we produced kind of delved in a little bit deeper into some of the topics and climate justice issues that we'll be exploring with the group over the next year. Next slide, please.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all for being here and for waiting to hear the voice of the Roma community. My name is Elena. I was born in Bucharest, and at the age of 6, I moved to Spain. 4 years ago, I moved to Ireland, where my whole family is and where I have the most connection with my culture. At the start of 2023, I started to work as the Roma Climate Justice Peer Education worker with Cairde and Friends of the Earth. A key part of this role has been the research we are discussing today. Most of us are aware of the extreme energy poverty that the world suffers. But before this research, I would not have imagined the extreme situation in which my community finds itself. I complete questionnaires with 32 Roma men and women to learn about their experience of the energy poverty and to see what they know about the climate change. The conclusion is clear. The Roma community suffer many obstacles to inclusion in Ireland, and energy costs are one of the main causes that plunge us into a vicious cycle of poverty. Today, very few people can keep their homes warm, and this is a huge effort to be able to pay the bills. In Ireland, most houses have very poor insulation, so a lot of energy is wasted. Some people have to go to the extreme of putting blankets and tape on their doors and windows, thinking that this will have been a thing of the past in the extreme poverty we suffer in Romania. Despite everything, many Roma are grateful for being able to have a roof over their heads. Thanks you, Cairde and Friends of the Earth, for making this research possible, and thanks you very much to my community for having participated and shared their experiences and obstacles with me.
Thanks, Elena. So I'll just go through some of the findings and the kind of the background information of the research. Elena conducted this research over a couple of months during the summer, and as she said, 32 respondents. So the majority were female, and they paid on average from 500 to 1,000 euro a month, with some, depending on household size, going up to 1,500 or 2,000 euro. Average size of people living together, so this included families and households, which also included children across all accommodation types, were 5.5 people. Number of families usually per household was above 1. Of the respondents, there were 7 single adult families, and they all were women. The majority of these also lived in emergency accommodation. And for this research, majority of respondents were living in Leinster. Okay, next slide. So the accommodation types, majority were in private rented accommodation. So that included housing assistance payments and non-housing assistance payments. Then we had social housing, a overcrowded accommodation, and emergency accommodation. Thank you. So, and the age of respondents all ranged, with majority being aged 36 to 45. Pass over to Elena.
This is some experience we are recopilated. I am happy because I don't have to live in the hotel, but my house is really in bad condition. A Roma woman aged in 26-35. I have a small son who had heart surgery. In winter, it's very difficult for me to keep my house warm and comfortable. Roma man, aged 18-25. One family household had average 2.1 rooms. Two family household had 3.2 rooms. Majority of people rented the entire property.
So you can see that the housing situation for Roma across the board is overcrowding. Majority of households have two families in the households, and that over 50% in the responses were unhappy of their current accommodation due to the issues including cost, living conditions, and location. And more than 25% of the respondents were living in accommodation that was damp and structurally unsound, very much reflective of what Collette was mentioning around housing structures in Ireland. Next slide.
Another big problem that I suffer in my house is expenses. In winter, I never allow myself to keep my house warm out of fear. Roma woman, aged 46-55. Most people were either very worried or extremely worried about their energy bills, with many restricting their energy use. None had approached services to support with their bills.
So out of the respondents then, the majority lived in private or rented social housing accommodation, and they expressed either being very worried or extremely worried about their energy bills. Nearly 70% said that they were not able to keep their home warm enough, and more than 80% reported that they had reduced their energy bills to keep their bills low. What we found through the through the research, there was a lot of qualitative information that we captured as well, and it really paints a very challenging and stark picture for people, especially regarding energy and heat poverty. One such gentleman was talking about how he was happy with his accommodation overall, but he felt that it was sometimes difficult to keep his home warm enough. There are two families living in this house between 4 rooms. I think there was up to eight children in the households as well. So you can see that families were really having to share a small number of rooms. This gentleman also was paying the highest level of rent across the research participants. But he went to the extreme as well to collect his own wood and make a fire in the fireplace just to heat his home. The family have access to necessary appliances. And like Theresa mentioned as well, there was a real worry and concern about the costs of bills. So they resorted to not using the appliances very oftentimes. And was also responding that he was not able to keep the house warm enough. Other parts of the research that we were able to look into were attitudes to climate action and climate change, and what were some of the most pressing issues for Roma. So it could have been things like housing, education, discrimination, health, lots of different issues. But with this one, this Roma man, he felt he dreams of a future where there's no where there's change for children, there's no racism and discrimination anymore. And the other person said that they felt that the structure of their house was not very strong, and a lot of cold came through their windows. They dream of having solar panels and have some type of help and support to pay for the garbage. Everything is extremely expensive. Garbage, gas, and children's expensive. It really makes it difficult to make ends meet. So within that too, within these questions and how they link climate justice, heat and energy poverty to the Roma community, we were curious, well, what does like climate change mean to you? And over a quarter expressed high worry about climate change, but they also reported that most of them did not feel confident in being able to take climate action too, either because of not knowing what would kind of constitute climate action, or knowing more about what climate change was. This is really important because in the context of different plans, different social policies, what is available to Roma and to marginalized communities is really limited. So this whole idea of integration and inclusion in the description and writing of policies is really important. So we've just put some recommendations together for this report, by asking that the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage assure that all accommodation, including emergency accommodation, rented accommodation, is properly and sufficiently insulated, heated and energy efficient, with the introduction of minimum BERs in the private rental sector from 2025, alongside strong rental protections against evictions and rent hikes. And there should also be appropriate and affordable methods of rubbish disposal, because the picture is very different across where you're located, whether it's in like urban Dublin or rural areas. There's not a kind of consistency around rubbish disposal, waste management. That there should be adequately resourced support for peer education and peer support for Roma. It's important for access to English language and literacy classes and overall inclusion in Irish society for Roma. There's a lot of talk about global citizenship education and education for sustainable development, and we from Friends of the Earth and Cairde see it as imperative that Roma are included and reached through these civil engagement and outreach programs and interventions. Alongside the push for active travel, that means that we need to ensure that investments are made in public transport, that it's safe, by providing training that tackles racism, discrimination, and anti-gypsyism, so that people can adequately also respond in public scenarios or situations in case of any discrimination or acts of inequality. That travel also should be low cost, reliable, available across all demographics and regions. So depending on your ability, your location, age, socioeconomic status, that transport is fair and accessible for all. Next slide. So then the funding should be available for organizations to tap in and reach Roma communities too. There's a wealth of knowledge within this group of people about their lived experiences and things that would really implement and help them in terms of heat and energy poverty, reacting to social inequalities. That there should be a specifically addressed measure within climate change and climate justice and their impacts on Roma and travellers in the National Traveller and Roma Inclusion Strategy. Again, retrofitting, like mentioned, should target rental accommodation and ensuring security of tenancy for the tenants, and that all relevant schemes and materials are translated into languages that are commonly used by Roma in Ireland, such as Romanian, Czech, Slovak, and among others. Finally, there is the Friends of the Earth Warm Homes campaign. So this research has been able to feed into our Friends of the Earth campaigns. This program itself is actually under a global citizenship education program, so it's funded through Irish Aid. So it's really what we've been able to see is that we've been able to reach out, learn from community, reflect on what needs are, communicate them, and also provide reflective workshops with the Roma on energy poverty, peer support, and what they do to ensure that they can reduce their bills and warm their home. So the space within trying to find bringing climate justice and climate action together through our campaigns and education is really, really important to us. So it'd be really great if you wanted to engage with Friends of the Earth Warm Homes campaign or through the Roma Peer Justice Education Worker too. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much to Sara and Elena for their amazing contribution. And just before I introduce our final contributor, I'd just like to remind everybody again to enter your questions into the Q&A box if you have any for our Q&A session, which will be coming up just after Avril's contribution. So now I will introduce our final contributor, who is Avril Ní Shearcaigh of the Aran Islands Energy Co-Operative. And Avril has been working as the manager of the Aran Islands Energy Co-Operative for the past 7 years. She has a background in communications, something which has helped her hugely in her role within the co-op when dealing with local residents and other stakeholders in the energy transition. The co-op has been involved in national and European funded research projects since 2018, which is helping them to progress their goal of energy self-sufficiency and securing the future of the islands by putting them in touch with experts and problem solvers, all while generating year-round employment on the islands. So Avril, it's over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hello, everybody. As Vanessa said, my name is Avril Ní Shearcaigh. I'm the manager of the Aran Islands Energy Co-op. The co-op was established in 2012 by a group of local residents. Membership in the cooperative is only open to residents or businesses that are located on one of the 3 Aran Islands. And I suppose the overarching kind of goal of the co-op from the very beginning has been to make the islands self-sufficient in terms of energy, to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, for lowering the carbon footprint of the islands, ideally making us carbon neutral. And there were a few main elements, I suppose, that were recognised that we would have to tackle in order to achieve that. So that was primarily the electrification of heat and transport, the renovation or the upgrading of existing homes and buildings across the 3 islands, and then to generate a community-owned source of electricity. Our cooperative does not pay a dividend to any shareholders, so all of the profits from a community-owned, say, wind turbine or solar farm would all be then put into a community benefit fund or a pot which would benefit the entire community, as opposed to paying out dividends every year to our shareholders. From the very beginning, the co-op was really active in, I suppose, facilitating and coordinating renovation works across the 3 Aran Islands, using some of SEAI's community grant schemes like the Better Energy Homes and Better Energy Communities projects. Unfortunately, after a couple of years and after a lot of success, I should say as well, where about 50% of buildings on the islands were retrofitted to some degree, maybe not all to a really high BER, but they all had some kind of upgrade take place. We found it more and more difficult year on year to actually get contractors to the islands, just purely from a logistical point of view, but also because the work got a lot easier to find on the mainland. They were a lot busier on the mainland. They didn't really need to come out and need the hassle of coming out to the islands and all of the logistical challenges that entails. And so it became more and more difficult to get quotes from contractors, to get people out to carry out upgrade works on the islands. And that's a huge challenge that we see, not just in the climate or energy side of things, but all across the board, really, with any kind of work that needs to be done on the islands. It can be a challenge to convince tradespeople to take on the work. And then often you're in a situation where you maybe don't get as many prices to compare, or, there isn't as much competition, I suppose. In the last number of years, we've tried to address some of those challenges. So we have secured EU funding from an EU Life Fund in a project called LEAP, which is being coordinated by the ATU, the Atlantic Technological University in Sligo. And as part of that project, we have set up an energy agency for our region. So it covers the Connemara Gaeltacht region and the Galway Islands, the Aran Islands and Inishbofin as well. There are also 2 other energy agencies established as part of that project. LEAP is local energy agencies for peripheral regions. So specifically targeting really isolated coastal, in a lot of cases, areas where we don't have the benefits that maybe somebody living in a city or maybe in a big town would, in terms of getting contractors to actually come out and carry out the work. We also tend not to maybe have huge, big estates and housing estates. So it's kind of one-off houses, a lot of really old stone buildings. And I know we heard Theresa talking about it earlier. Really, in order to have a just transition, if we're going to eliminate coal and oil and gas from home heating, we need to be able to bring the older housing stock, the stone-built homes, up to a standard where they're able to install a heat pump and can run a heat pump efficiently. That is really, really challenging, and it's something that we see on the islands a huge portion of the homes are stone built, and that is something that we're working to address. So with this new energy agency, we have people employed there with a skill set who are experts basically in their area. They're able to identify what works are needed. They're aware of kind of what the standards are and what the regulations are across the sector, what standards SEAI require. They're able to liaise with contractors, and ideally will be able to build a kind of supply chain of contractors by being able to bundle all of the homes in the area together. So you're not asking them to come out to the island for 2 or 3 houses, you're asking them to take on maybe 50 houses between the mainland and the islands and make it more worth their while in that sense. The next project that we've been working on in the last number of years is a solar mehel. So these are popping up all over the country. It's not really something that's in any way alien to people who live on the islands, because we almost have to set up a mehel to get anything done, whether it's getting your chimney swept or maybe getting a locksmith out or something like that. So a mehel essentially is an Irish word for a group of people coming together to complete a certain task. So it might have been, cutting turf or harvesting things or, that kind of thing. And essentially we're doing the same thing here, but for solar panels. So we're bringing groups of homeowners together to leverage maybe better prices, maybe getting a discount on your PV installation that way. And I suppose for us on the islands, we're able to then share equally the additional cost. And living on the islands in itself just means your cost of living is higher straight away because everything is imported, and you have extra freight costs and cargo costs associated with that. Tradespeople coming to the island and also have to pay accommodation, so their workers tend not to be able to get home that evening, and they might have to put them up for a week or 2 weeks or however long the project takes. So instead of that cost being on 1 or 2 households, we're trying to bundle them all together so we can share that evenly and hopefully get better value. I suppose I am really aware that not everyone, or certainly only a portion of our community, actually have the disposable income to be able to invest in solar PV panels. It probably highlights the injustice of it all, because there are people who maybe can't afford it that actually need to lower their electricity bills, and are struggling with their energy bills but aren't in a position to make that initial investment. And I think that's what we see a lot of the time, is the people that maybe can afford to get this work carried out, not necessarily the ones that need it the least, but the impact on people who can't afford it maybe is disproportionate. And so we have been, and we're still scoping out a project on the islands where we as a cooperative might be able to actually purchase solar PV equipment, and it would be installed on homes across the islands at no cost to the homeowner or to the business owner, but that they would then be billed by us for the energy that they use from those panels in a similar way to what they already are with their electricity supplier. We'd just have a separate meter, but it would be at a much lower than market rate cost. So it would still lower their energy bills and they wouldn't have to make that initial outlay. And that's just one of the ways that we're trying to, I suppose, make it feasible for everybody to participate, and ensure that we're not leaving people who don't have a huge amount of disposable income behind. Obviously that scheme is open to others as well, but people who have the disposable income tend to prefer to participate in the mehels and own the equipment themselves outright. We're also developing a community-owned solar farm, or hoping to develop a community-owned solar farm on the islands. We had been pursuing a community wind project with huge community support for years, but planning permission has been our biggest barrier. So we're now looking at selecting potentially suitable sites for a community scale solar farm, and all of the profits from a project like that would go into, as I said earlier, a community benefit fund. And that could be used to maybe further subsidise the existing grants that are available for people to retrofit their homes. It might be able to be used for something that's not necessarily energy related at all, but that would improve the services, or things available for people living in our community. And so essentially it is very much a social enterprise based model for the work that we're doing. We don't receive any state funding to kind of keep our show on the road. All of our funding comes from our participation in EU research projects, and we're really, really lucky that we have a community on the islands that are really engaged. Often that means, asking people in the community to attend workshops, to attend focus groups, maybe to have monitoring equipment installed in their homes, to give feedback on things, and only for them and only for the fact that they're really happy to engage and help us with that work, we wouldn't be able to employ the staff that we have. So at the moment we have 4 people employed. We have 2 full-time and 2 part-time employees in the cooperative, and that's a huge achievement for us. It's one of our goals to be able to, I suppose, provide long-term year-round employment. The islands are really, really popular tourist destinations, but a huge portion of the jobs available on the islands are seasonal because of that. And so that then feeds into maybe people who are in fuel poverty or who have lower incomes because their employment is very seasonal. And so that's a huge win for us to be able to provide those jobs. And we're also able to combine the other common goals that we have with our community in terms of, maintaining the population of the islands, or maybe even bringing people back to live here and increasing the population of the islands. And that all kind of feeds into the, more children going to the schools, more people buying things in the supermarkets. It has a huge impact all across the community outside of the energy and climate benefits to our work. And so we call those things secondary benefits, but they're every bit as important, in my opinion. And I think that's more or less it from me, unless anybody has any questions. And if so, I'd be really happy to answer them. Thanks a million.
Thanks very much, Avril, for so much information packed into that small piece. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to invite all our contributors to turn on their cameras. If I can hit the stop share button. There we go. So we're happy to open the virtual floor to questions and answers, but we also do have a few questions ourselves for our participants. And I think I will start with Theresa. So Theresa, do you think that attention to gender and care in our energy and climate policies would make a difference to experiences like yours, and how would that change?
Yeah, definitely. In Clare, I'm involved with the PPN, the Public Participation Network, and we did research on just transition there last year and how we might be able to use state money, like this funding to every local authority, and how we might be able to use that funding to incorporate a just transition. But we did get to talk to a lot of women, and including them, when you want to talk to the women, you need to make the situation where they can actually access you. It needs to be in their own location. It needs to have childcare if necessary. It also, we were willing to pay people to come along to research, and which seems to be shunned by a lot of research places, but it actually is, why not pay people for their time? And women need to be at the decision-making table on all of this. And that's what's been missing for so many years. We have so little female representation in this country, and minorities. Across the board, we do a pretty good job in Clare, but across the board, when the systems are being set at national level especially, and also at local authority level, and I urge women to get involved with whatever they can in their own community. But yeah, we need to be there.
Thanks very much, Theresa. Sara and Elena, I'll come to you two next. And a really important part of the research that Friends of the Earth and Cairde did is that one of the researchers, being Elena here, is a member of the Roma community that's actually being researched. So do you think it's important that communities more vulnerable to climate impacts like the Roma community are themselves involved in research on how climate impacts them? And why do you think so?
Well, it is essential that we are included in research. It is an important step to feel part of the community where we live. Vulnerable communities usually feel like second-class citizens All communities should try to be more involved with these aspects. Therefore, I think it's something great and a great step both for inclusion and for knowledge of the problems of today's world that directly affect and impact us. If we don't know, if we don't, sorry, if we don't have the knowledge of that affect us and how it impact on the most vulnerable communities, we will not be able to find a solution. By being part of this important research and discussion, we can raise awareness of the unique struggles that the Roma communities face, especially when it comes to the climate change. The impact of the climate change, such as extreme weather and poor air quality, disproportionately affect the most vulnerable people in society. When we include these communities in the conversation, we not only validate their experience, but also help ensure that their voices are heard in the development of appropriate solutions. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Elena. And Avril, I'll come to you now. Avril, do you see a feminist community work approach in the work of the Aran Islands Co-op at all?
Well, I think that the four employees that we have in our community group are all just happen to be female. That isn't done on purpose, but I think it's a great testament to us and to the work that we're doing. I think as a cooperative, we're quite I think we're quite progressive even as an employer. For example, I've been working from home for the last 7 years now, almost. Even before it became, popular during COVID. I have 4 young children. There's no childcare really available on the island until children start to go to kind of preschool and that kind of thing. So I probably wouldn't be able to work in an office full time, 9 to 5. I wouldn't have the opportunity. I wouldn't be able to work. It obviously wouldn't be benefiting my whole family as it is. And I also feel like I'm making a really valuable contribution to my community, which I probably wouldn't be able to make. Only from my employer is quite flexible and quite understanding in terms of my hours and working around school pickups and things like that. I think as a whole and as a community, we're quite good on equality and making sure that we're treating people equally. And it's something that we, I suppose, are constantly aware of as well. So it's, it comes up again and again at board meetings and things like that. It won't always be the women that are going out to get the cups of tea at a meeting and looking after everybody. That's not really what we're there to do. We're quite conscious of stereotypes, I think, as well, maybe, and just trying to make it very equal for everybody to be able to participate in our cooperative as a shareholder or as a director or as a member of staff.
Thanks very much, Avril. I know we're kind of close to time, but I do have time for at least one more question, and it is for Sara and Elena, maybe. So somebody asks, has the habitual residence condition come up in this research in Roma accessing social welfare, for example, accessing fuel allowance and other state supports for a just transition?
That was a part of our reflection when we looked at the data that came through, but also understanding the broader context of what the reality was for renters. And that's the majority of how Roma people are accessing accommodation. What we know is that for, say, rented accommodation or multi-household accommodation, the bills generally go to the landlords. So any sort of like benefits or energy like supports won't actually trickle down to the people that might necessarily, let me say, trickle down to the individual bill payers. What we did find was two things, that because of generally bills are paid in cash or they're used in a meter, there isn't the sort of discounts that one might get when you're paying bills through a direct debit or through like accredited service. And we also found that no one who was saying that they were experiencing energy poverty or feeling like their bills were too high or they're struggling to pay bills, they didn't actually go and access any support services that might be able to help them with that in these instances anyway. So again, it's just a snapshot of some of the responses and doesn't represent the full picture, of course. But we know that that's based on sort of the different like living arrangements, it might mean that different state benefits mightn't actually come through to the people that need them most.
Thanks so much for that, Sarah. And I will see we are all out of time today, unfortunately. So I would like to thank all of you for attending and watching our webinar today, to all of our guest contributors for their amazing contributions, and a big thank you to Ciara as well for doing our ISL interpretation the whole way through. What we want to see, a warm and safe home should not be a luxury. However, for far too many women and people from marginalised communities, living in a warm, energy-efficient home is unattainable. Access to energy efficiency grants and schemes, such as retrofitting, is impaired by cost, long waiting lists, and eligibility issues for those who are not traditional homeowners, such as private renters, travellers, and those in direct provision. So what we really need to do is to make sure that everybody can be safe, can be warm, and can have clean, green energy. And so thank you so much to everybody for attending today. And we hope you all have a really good rest of your day and stay wrapped up, because it looks like it's getting stormy out there.